And this takes me back to something Aquila said earlier, that it's not just TERF. And this is when I start seeing shades of Donald Trump in J.K. Rowling. Trump's a narcissist. We can all agree with that, right?
Yes.
And so he says things that people really like. It's that people-pleasing thing we talked about. And he thinks they're his people. But of course, we're seeing more and more, no, they only... Both J.K. Rowling and Trump believe that people follow them because of their narcissism, when in fact, they're just using them as a mouthpiece. The minute they stop saying things they want them to say, those hordes will turn.
Ironically, the comparison I was thinking was actually Taylor Swift.
Okay. Oh, the lawsuit and all that stuff when people turned on her?
No, it wasn't even that. Taylor's most recent hit was a song called Anti-Hero.
Okay.
Which is like, it kind of reads like her finally noticing all her mistakes and starting to realize that, hey, if everyone says this is an issue, maybe it's actually an issue. And there's a point in the bridge where she said, "Did you hear about my covert narcissism I disguise as altruism?"
Okay.
And it's like, honey, the way you behave, I think there is some narcissism there, but it's like, I see that same attention-seeking behavior from Rowling.
Interesting.
And I mean, Rowling took herself off the richest people in the world list by donating so much. And it's like, for a long time, that's what she was known for, was Harry Potter, and she was extremely generous.
But... That's an Aquila, can you add to the discussion? Because that whole thing about charity and the way celebrities give to charity, and it is, I wouldn't even say covert narcissism. It's narcissism. It is trying to paper over narcissism and excess and consumerism with altruism, but it's very cynical.
You know, I have mixed feelings on that one.
Mm-hmm.
It boils down to the individual so much, that there's no definitive profile. I'm certain that with some celebrities, donating to charities is cynical, is designed to generate publicity for them, and not just celebrities, but high-powered executives, companies. It's all about the optics. Now, there are some, a non-zero number, I don't know what the percentages are, that actually believe in the causes that they give to. It all depends on the person, the cause, and the circumstances. And it may actually, and I'm willing to go out on a limb and say it'll actually fluctuate between, the individual and the charity, as they combine and, disengage. So it's very different. And there are some nonprofits that are deeply unsettling in their behavior. A great one that still sticks in my craw is the Wounded Warrior Project. And it got to a point where 60 Minutes did a profile digging into their business practices because they were so shitty. Whether or not they've unfucked themselves, I don't know. But I make it a point not to give to them because they do have that history. But I will quietly give to other charities because I believe in what they do.
Right. Yeah, I think for me, the line, because there are a lot of, Daniel Radcliffe's work on the Trevor Project, Emma Watson's work on He for She, I think those are sincere, because they don't, the thing about Rowling is when she is criticized, it's like, look how much I give to charity, look how much I give to women's shelters. That doesn't mean you can't be a shitty person in other ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Right. Like that to me is the red. Okay. So you guys are in agreement that's a fair line to set. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Liana, I come from the Christian church.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Our Judaism has this concept of tzedakah, which people translate as charity, but it actually means obligation. I talk about this all the time because the ideal form of charity is charity that is invisible, right? So job creation or teaching someone a skill or a trade, giving people the ability to stand on their own, actually giving people a hand up instead of a hand out. That's what we're supposed to strive for. Now, that doesn't mean we don't give to other sorts of charity. It's just seen as it's farther from the ideal. It's still good, but the more anonymized and the more transformative you can make the act, the better.
It's that do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing.
Well, it's more about the belief that people go through hard times because it's an opportunity for us to show the best in ourselves, as opposed to pitying people or thinking they've done something wrong. Hardship, because why would a just God allow bad things? The answer to this question is, well, this gives us the opportunity to be that divine spark to go in and correct the shittiness. And you're supposed to put something on the line for that. And
you're not supposed to get a tax cut.
Well, I mean, a tax cut, okay. I don't mind the government encouraging charitable giving to city people. I don't mind that. But, it's more, okay, the women's shelter, that I have a real issue with this. So if I start ripping on this, I apologize in advance, because I've done a lot of stuff with what we call White Ribbon up here, the charity that came out of the L'École Polytechnique shooting in the 90s. It's one of the worst mass shootings in Canadian history, and it was specifically targeting women. And, back then we were saying women's shelters, like rape shelters, don't reduce rape. Spousal abuse counseling, spousal abuse charities, the shelters, or the refuges as they call it in the UK, don't reduce spousal abuse. You're not attacking the root problem. And so J.K. Rowling is going at trans people in bathrooms, which doesn't deal with the root problem of misogynistic violence that also affects trans women. And she's setting up these shelters for cisgender women only that doesn't directly reduce the number of sexual assaults that are out there either. And she's with these groups. She knows better.
Yeah, you have to actually address the societal issue. And in a lot of situations, it's going to be addressing men's issues and what is it that brings men to this point.
Yeah.
And some of it is going to be that they feel they have to be aggressive to be men.
Yep.
Or it's just they don't know better.
Those are two parts of it. And back in the day, there were rites of passage, not just being born, but becoming an adult, and there were corresponding rituals for men and women. And when my mother died in the middle of the pandemic, we could not safely have a funeral.
Yeah.
And I dismissed the idea that rituals have real power in the here and now, until I was faced with the reality that there was no closure to the grieving. And in not having a funeral, I found myself unmoored.
Yeah.
And we don't really, men don't have this sense of, well, there's a demarcation of, this is how I act as a child, this is how I act as a teen, this is how I act as a man. And when you're bombarded with signposts of do this, not this, but there's no context. We say be a man, but there's no clear demarcation of this is what being a man is defined as.
Right.
And this is where your manhood starts. I mean, Liana, the bar mitzvah
yeah,
and the bat mitzvah, those are important.
Oh, the bat mitzvah is really debated because it's not required.
Yeah.
Right.
But the bar mitzvah, is required.
Well, you get into the commentaries and they talk about the fact that boys have that rite of passage because they don't get periods.
And I was about to make that same point, that it's like we, as cisgendered women, for lack of a better phrase, we have that line of demarcation where it's suddenly things change, whether it's handled well or not.
Well, we also have the prefix change on marriage if we choose, right? Men don't. So, when I used to work at a conservative talk radio station, and the show after the one I was on was a men's show. And they talked about the loss of rites of passage and why that's significant, because as culture has, it's not just age, it's the urban rural split. Because, getting your driver's license, your first car, that doesn't happen to a lot of people who live in cities anymore. Rent's too expensive. You really don't need it. You take transit. So some Gen Z, a lot of millennials either don't have a driver's license or didn't get it until they were 30 or in their
I still
30s.
Don't have mine.
There you go. Perfect example. The idea of, well, I grew up in a place that people just didn't learn to drive because their parents didn't have cars. It was an immigrant, especially a refugee heavy neighborhood with a lot of public transit. Everybody took the bus. So yeah, I was one of the people who could drive. I had access to a car. Guess who was taxi? Because we didn't have Uber back then. Now, the nice thing about that is it really protected me from underage binge drinking and drugs because I knew I had to drive. So not only did I not partake, but nobody pushed it on me because I was the one driving everybody home. But that was freedom, right? And now, this is a charged thing, but I've talked to a lot of young men who said their only rite of passage is pretty much having to register for the draft in the US.
And I'm glad you made that that comment. Thinking about my own life, I really didn't start to grow up and start acting like a man until after I joined the military and had that right of graduating basic and AIT to become part of the regular army. And then all of a sudden, looking back, I could, my friends and family could see the change in behavior because there was an expectation that, I conduct myself in a certain way. Now, I'm not saying that men need to go out and join the military. The military is not for everybody. And if it's not for you, don't go. But
no college credit is worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, the post 9/11 GI Bill paid for my bachelor's, but I also, in my mid 40s, I have the body of someone in their 60s or 70s. You
can just be a competitive dancer and get the exact same stuff, Aquila. I feel you. I was at the rheumatologist this week. I feel you.
Oh, geez.
I
was at the neurologist.
Yeah.
I've got an appointment with the movement specialist. All these things, because my body is saying, you did what?
Yeah, it's repetitive strain injuries in your hips, your knees. Knees get murdered by the military because of the gear.
Feet, back, shoulder, lungs.
Yeah. But it does give, because of the PTSD stuff I've done, I work with a lot of veterans. And it's interesting because people would think, they'd really resent their time in the military, but they love it. It's civilian life because it doesn't make sense. to the guys I know.
It's not just that it doesn't make sense when you've gotten so used to a very regimented culture. It's that the kinds of relationships that you have in the military don't always form in the civilian world. When it's like, particularly if you're living in the barracks, it's like living in the dorms. You live, you eat, you sleep with these people every day, and you work with them every day. And all those little interactions form some very deep relationships, and they can be transformative.
And I think that may have been part of the thing people connected to with the Harry Potter books as well, that boarding school, because it's a lot of the same things, right? The fact that you sleep together, you eat together, you go to class together, you're sorted into houses that you have allegiance to, that you compete as a team as part of. And which is part of the reason that I always joke that Hogwarts Legacy is Hufflepuff Simulator, because Hufflepuff got no freaking love in this whole thing, right? And
what is the deal with Hufflepuff? Because
okay, this is the Hogwarts houses. I will do my treatise on Hogwarts houses now, because it's a way J.K. Rowling thinks, and she is so internalized the misogyny of innate traits.
Okay, just for the record, the house system is something that is from British boarding schools. So I just wanted to make sure people know that.
So, all that stuff, O levels or A levels, it's all British schooling. Yeah. My stepdad, who was from the UK, took A levels. He explained all that stuff to us. We're like, what? But the idea of, there's an inherently evil house. That's not from British boarding schools, right?
True. No.
That's what she added. And the idea that there is one house that is defined by bravery. There is one house that is defined by intelligence. There is one house that is defined by ambition and cunning. And then there's the ones who are just nice. And I always go back to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Like, the Hufflepuff are the Epsilons of Harry Potter.
There's also a point in one of the Sorting Hat songs, none of which made it into the movies, where it tells the story that the founders were like, okay, Slytherin was like, I'll take the ambitious kids. Gryffindor, Godric's like, I'll take the, oh God, I have a character named Godric. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's in Elden Ring too, so you're good.
Yes. Gryffindor, I'll take the brave. Ravenclaw, I'll take the clever. And Helga Hufflepuff said, "Well, I'll take the rest."
Yeah.
And it's like
just the rest, the leftovers. When I was really through a really, really good friend of mine, I was more involved in Harry Potter cosplay fandom. There were a lot of Hufflepuffs, and they really embraced the whole badger symbol. And so the fact that, in the demo of the game, I missed a lot of the stuff people got upset about, because all I saw was the giant badger on the back of they made the Hufflepuff uniform like the coolest. And all the Hufflepuffs were like, yes, badger's gonna badger, and that told me a lot about where the dev team was coming from. I saw that as a sign that they are making a Harry Potter game for the rest of us. And so I missed the whole goblin thing, because I just tune out, this is a game about, because the synopsis a video game company releases usually survives maybe the first couple chapters, and then it's the Universal theme park where I think something goes horribly wrong and you get into the meat of the whole thing, right? You set it up, you set the theme so you can do variations on the theme or break the theme. And of course, the playable character in Hogwarts Legacy has some connection to some ancient magic that predates what we know of Hogwarts magic. They're the key to it all. So obviously there are going to be, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but that suggests that there are going to be some subversive moral gray areas in this game.
My head already hurts.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the problem with game marketing, right? And that's I've gotten for years of being a games journalist and going, okay, I can write 3 paragraphs about what this game is about, or I can come up with a cheeky turn of phrase that is going to piss some people off, but it makes the point. And so I get Hufflepuff Simulator, right? Because that's cutting to the chase. And that's why I sort of, I also went to an exhibit, a prop and costume exhibit from the Potter films. And I saw how much the costume team and the props team, because they were working with children, they had a lot more practical things. So they built a centaur model, even though the centaurs were CGI, so the kids could see what they were dealing with. Right. And they actually had the mandrakes, again, models they could actually pull, and they actually screamed because they wanted authentic reactions from the kids. And the little details in the costumes were so subversive. The one, first of all, they put Dumbledore in lavender, and I'm like, oh, that's an interesting shout out. The Lavender Menace, right? But then the moment where I'm like, 2 things, where I thought the wardrobe department was coding something in Harry Potter that J.K. Rowling did not intend. They're red, when you use that green tinted film, or in this case video, red washes out. It ends up being kind of a gray or a brown or a purple because of lighting. So you don't see it in the finished product. And Lucius Malfoy's vest had this tiny little red pinstripe running through it, vertical pinstripe. Sirius Black's pants had the same material. And I'm like, oh shit, they're coding that they're not as different as they'd like to think they are. Because they're both rich boys who sulk about it, right? They're both in that same trap in their own minds of coming from pure blood families, right? Because the Blacks are the common root between the Narcissa was
Narcissa
Black before she was Narcissa Malfoy. Right. The families aren't that different. And I thought that was, I do too. The coding there was not what J.K. Rowling intended, because she wanted Sirius to be this very sympathetic figure. He's not. And the movie people acknowledge that. The other thing I noticed is that Snape's costume is one of the few that does not change between movies. It's the same start to finish. It's a vicar's coat, but instead of the masculine sleeve, they put a feminine cap sleeve. It's a gathered cap sleeve on his coat. And I looked at that and went, you are clever bastards. Because she's not going to catch that. Right? They were drawing on the fact he's got a feminine inner essence. And so to me, it's sort of telegraphed that, yes, Snape loved Lily, but in that let's be sisters and braid each other's hair kind of way, not the romantic boy-girl love that James had for her.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned, I thought of this earlier and we moved on before I could address it, but the Patronus is a protector.
Yeah.
And more, like, I see your point, but I almost wonder if more than identifying with it, it's Snape saw Lily as his protector from James.
That's interesting, because if that's true, why would he lash out at her the way he did?
I don't know. I've lashed out at people.
Okay, fair. I mean, that's an interesting interpretation. And this is part of the reason when the books got really popular. I was like, shut up, because I was doing to J.K. Rowling talking about it so much. Because I was going from the Neil Gaiman advice to Tori Amos thing. He broke his own rule on Sandman on Netflix. Let people connect to it in their own way. Don't over talk the work. Let people connect to it in their yeah.
So, when you're talking about, Snape having this feminine inner essence and he's a protector, I had an interesting thought, and I want to get you guys' feedback. another component that might be driving Rowling's behavior, particularly in anti-trans statements, is the fact that she also has a need to be a protector. So by, warding off the othered group, she may also be feeding that need because she does see an inherent threat to, from trans people, not in the same way that we think that she does in terms of, sexual assault, but we, trans people represent, inherent change, and that change is inevitable.
Well, she hates change. It's very obvious.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And
why does she keep retconning her shit?
Because she can control that. I'll knit this all together. Because Aquila, I went down that, we're doing the rabbit hole again, which I've now made dirty because furries. Brain went there, can't come out. Zootopia,
Liana and
never
her furry
same.
audience.
I am so sorry. I love Alice in Wonderland. We'll move on. But I said before that there's no change to status quo in the culture of Harry Potter, and I found that very disappointing. But you see the traditionalism and the fact that she's new money, living in a Scottish castle, wanting to maintain her Britishness while living in Scotland, right? She is very clearly trying to ingratiate herself to the peerage, to the nobility. Now, the nobility is full of transphobes because they're all obsessed about bloodlines and inherent worth and proper stock and proper breeding. You cannot have the idea of inherent worth through divine right of kings and accept the idea that, hey, maybe humanity is in the mind and not the body. There's an inherent conflict to the philosophies. And she has steeped herself. She's that tea bag that's been sitting in the water too long and's become bitter in that way. Because the one thing new money learns in the British aristocracy really quick is it doesn't matter how rich you are if you're not from the right family. And so I think she has tried to enter the wizarding world of the British peerage, and she'll always be a mudblood. And
ouch.
That's the way it works. I mean, it was a big deal that, remember Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's first wife? I don't think he's been married, but they really got on her because she was a commoner. It's the whole Wallace Simpson, Meghan Markle thing. Oh, they're American. Catherine was
Wallace Simpson was a terrible person.
Let's
just be honest there.
But let's face it, a lot of the British aristocracy were Nazi sympathizers at that time too. So sliding scale. But yes, Wallace Simpson is a unique thing. But it was a big deal that Sarah Ferguson was a commoner. It was a big deal that Catherine's family was new money. They really tested her. Diana had to be of the proper stock when she married Charles, right? And people don't know, one of the things that Diana underwent was a genitals inspection to make sure she was properly, right? You're seeing all the things that would trip on the trans stuff that they don't see why it's dehumanizing, because it's a mark of status to them.
Jesus. What?
Yeah. And this all clashes, right? It all starts to make sense why the British peerage has such bigotry. It is, and I mean, Prince Harry's just ripping the damn lid off the whole thing. And I mean,
I so enjoyed that interview.
Oh, which one? So they were all
the 60 minutes.
That I read the transcript of that. I was so enthralled. He seems very credible.
There was a lot of emotion in his responses, particularly when he started talking about his mom, his experience at his funeral, at her funeral.
Yes.
And the bitterness between him and his brother, you could tell that there was a visceral connection and a genuine anger about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, keep in mind, Harry's the one that the rumor was he's not Charles's kid. And you know, I don't think that's true, but it was a nasty rumor because he looks something like Diana's lover at the time. I mean, the whole royal family's messed up, right?
It's not even just that. Reportedly, when Harry was born, Charles walked into the room, saw he was a redhead, and said, "Oh,
God,
he's a Spencer," and walked out.
Yeah. Yeah. Charles can't control Charles. And I mean, I do think a lot of the things Harry's doing, it's interesting because the opinion polling is very different on this side of the pond than in the UK. And it's been really interesting talking to people in the UK because the attitude is, well, it all could be true, but you don't talk about it. Right? There's this weird this is just the way things are done that's woven through the UK. And I do think that informs why, you know, the UK has been nicknamed TERF Island. Because it's in some ways it's worse than the US, even with all the anti-trans legislation going on at the state level in the US. The UK has hit this fever pitch with this stuff. It's not just J.K. Rowling, it's what's his name? Graham Linehan, Piers Morgan. There's a ton I've seen a lot of clips of quote unquote debates about trans people in the UK that involve no actual trans people on the panel. It's a mess. And, you know, at least Fox News got Caitlyn Jenner.
You know what part of the problem is? We haven't had a Will and Grace with trans people.
They tried with, what was that? Transparent?
I don't know. There was a show called Pose about like
that was more drag. There's a 911 Lone Star has a trans man. He's a trans man in real life. He plays one as his character too. They do some cool stuff that way. There was a very funny moment. Rob Lowe's the star of it.
But I don't know that it's as ubiquitous as Will and Grace was.
No, because it's not a comedy, but it is a network drama that is one of their top shows on Fox. Now, top shows on Fox is still lower, but there's a very funny moment where Rob Lowe, he's sort of taken this guy in as a confidant, and the something happened with the paramedics, and Rob Lowe goes, "I don't get women." And Brian Michael, I'm blanking on his name, but Rob Lowe goes, "I don't get women." And the trans guy goes, "Me neither, man." And it just hangs and they go to the next scene. And it's that kind of normalizing stuff that was I mean, the thing about Will and Grace is it was caricature by way of, and we're going to hit the word nobody likes here, normalization. Right? And I do think on this thing, there is a major difference between people who personally know trans people and people who don't because of that othering. And go ahead, Aquila.
Okay. So a lot, you know, in my experience, a lot of the fear of trans people has its roots in the unknown. It's like most people never even comes to mind what is gender identity. For someone who is trans, it's an everyday thing. And you know, it's been my experience since I started my transition that some of my biggest supporters have not been, you know, the progressives,
No.
they've been the conservatives who knew me before and are seeing this process firsthand and gaining that familiarity, and then they convey that familiarity to other, you know, sort of moderate conservatives that don't have contact with a trans person. And because there's been some, you know, personal experience, most conservatives are all about family. And it's like, hey, you know, don't fuck with me and I won't fuck with you.
Right.
Now, there is, you know, a point in the spectrum where that falls apart. But the ones that I've had contact with, they're like, you know, are you, you know, are you doing this to hide something? I'm like, no, I'm just trying to do this because I'm tired of wanting to kill myself.
Yeah. There's a weird, I don't know if it's double think. They don't see the conflict in, even here, though it's way more obvious in, especially where you are in sort of the New South, where they'll have these opinions about a people in general, and they don't connect it to the people they directly know. If they see you as a person, they'll treat you as a person, but they'll make comments about a group you belong to, and there's a disconnect because the attitude is, well, yes, there are rules for the little people, and then there are rules for us, and the reason we seek power is to keep that because we like it. And they don't see the problem with that. They just think that's the way things are.
I think there is also a bit of, if you see groups as monoliths, and then you meet one person, it's like, okay, well, you're different.
Right. You're not like those other blank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, the other day, you know, I kept seeing stuff about the Hufflepuff simulator on my Twitter timeline. And I tweeted, you know, seeing all this pop up, at least I can honestly say that Lovecraft learned better by the end of his life.
Oh, yeah.
And it's Aquila, you may not know this. I'm a big fan of the pulps, and I've spent quite a bit of time defending Lovecraft, because there are so many people who I've gotten into this argument with people where I'm like, okay, but by the end of his life, he acknowledged that he was wrong because he had friends who told him, dude, this mentality you have towards others isn't right. And at the end of his life, one of the last letters he wrote was saying, I realize now that these differences of race are just what the people in power perpetuate to keep us from rising up and to keep us fighting each other. And I've had people say, it doesn't matter.
Well, I mean,
he was wrong at this one point, and he wrote harmful.
There's a lot of deeply closeted homosexuality in Lovecraft's writing, though, too. Like, it's okay to have ritualized sex with men as long as you don't come. That's Lovecraft. Like, okay, dude, sure.
So I mean, I understand where you're at, and I understand where people draw the moral line because I've had to do it myself. You know, at what point does the bigotry just outweigh anything that you could contribute? And you know, to kind of draw it back to where we started, you know, I see Rowling's actions through one lens. The real danger is not necessarily with her, but her followers. And Leanna, I know that you've called them, you know, her flying monkeys.
I didn't coin that term, but I called them Death Eaters, and people pointed out it's a little bit more like flying monkeys. But go on, because
you know, they present the threat because, you know, if you've got one single person, you can deal with a threat of one at the individual level. But when you're talking about a distributed network of millions of people, or we'll say hundreds of thousands, because not all of them are going to be completely radicalized. But if you look at it through the lens of radicalization, you're going to start to see parallels between Rowling's followers and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why I don't want to push the people who are on the fence away over a video game. Because it's the same way, white supremacist groups, white nationalist groups get into video game communities and heavy metal community. Heavy metal's huge recruiting ground for white nationalist movements, because those tend to be people who are disenfranchised from society, lonely, disconnected, don't have those strong community and family ties. It's a race to who gets to them first. Al-Qaeda's the same way. That's why it's disenfranchised young people, men with a side of women, and it's all about who gets to them first and gives them a sense of belonging. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah,
although I think with Rowling, in Rowling's case, it's not the young people, it's another group that, I've heard you talk about, the wine moms.
Yeah, the wine moms. Yeah.
Because, if you think about why they turn to wine so much, is that they feel that they have no control over their surroundings. And so they self-medicate. They used to self-medicate with Valium or Xanax, and now it's alcohol, but the net effect is the same. You've got, a medicated state that doesn't change the underlying situation that causes them pain.
Yeah. And I mean, they're very passive aggressive.
Yeah. But when they mix with Rowling statements, they go from being passive aggressive to aggressive.
Well,
that's where the danger is.
Well, did you guys see that woman when they passed the bill in Scotland who hiked up her skirt at a female security guard and she had a merkin underneath it? There was no panties, just a giant tribble on her crotch.
What the fuck?
Oh yeah, and it was, if you're gonna take away my dignity, she was planning on doing it, right? And there's this weird thing that it's that I'm gonna talk about how abused I am, so I can talk about how men can't control themselves around me, right? It's this the lady doth protest too much, methinks, thing that happens with this wine mom group. But they're the TERFs, and in this case I do mean the people who claim to be feminists that hate trans people, not gender criticals or anything like that. The larger group, the subset, the TERFs, I think they have some kinks where they find it kind of sexy to be allegedly dehumanized, and so they pearl clutch anytime trans activists get a little spicy, and they throw it all over the internet as a perceived threat. And then one of them does that, and I'm like, they don't see the contradiction. They don't. And it's just so instructive to me. Song, were you going to say something?
I think part of it also is when you're forced to be straight-laced. And I think that's the biggest thing with the wine moms, is they've been forced not just to be wives and mothers, but also to be straight-laced. And I think that's why we do get so many stories about, the middle-aged couple who decides to explore BDSM because they have to do something.
Yeah.
And it's, a lot of the accounts I follow on Instagram are like these girls who wear these really pretty dresses and just lots of frills and organza and velvet. And, then they make videos running through fields. And there have actually been people who leave comments like, okay, whatever, you're delusional. You should be in a mental institution if you think you as an adult are allowed to do this.
Who cares?
Exactly. And, there's the freedom of dressing how you want, being how you want. And I think we get a lot of people who they feel so repressed because they haven't been allowed to do that, and it manifests in bizarre behavior.
I think we're all in agreement of this. So let's try to land this chopper, so to speak, here. What do we want people to take away? Because I mean, we could talk about this for another 4 hours. We you know, because one of the things about the Two Women Talking format is we start with something and we see where it goes, because the interconnectedness of it, everything's with femininity is that suppression, repression, yet we talk about oppression when really we should be talking about suppression and repression, right? There's a difference in being repressed and a difference of being oppressed. And I know I sounded like Solomon there, but forgive me. My boss fight character. Oppression. And so we didn't even talk about why people would be buying games. That's fine. I've done other content on that. But I'll start with you, Aquila. What do you want people to take away from this regarding J.K. Rowling, why she's dangerous, why, as you said, her words are violence, and so on. What do you want to leave us with?
Oh, okay. So there are so many things that we've discussed. So I'm going to just try and go, do some bullets. So the first thing is that the trans community is as diverse as any other population. Yeah. We're going to have our problem people. We're going to have our paragons. We're people. We were people before we transitioned. And I think that's something that really gets lost in all the shuffle. I don't think that Rowling sees her statements as dangerous. I genuinely do think that she's trying to protect her people, the air quotes are implied, and to protect her status quo. I also think that there are some underlying trauma for her. And I understand that, and I feel badly about it. I can't help her because she doesn't want to be helped. Her followers are absolutely a threat, and not because, they're dangerous people or they're somehow or another, Nazis in waiting. I'm sure that there are those people in her fan base, as with any large group. I think that they're dangerous because they don't apply a critical eye to what they're consuming and how they parrot it and the threat that conveys to everyone around them. And that's why I think they're dangerous. And also, as with Rowling, I don't know how to help them. I wish I did, because I think there's enough, generalized trauma that's a real problem, and it's only going to get worse the more that population denies it. If someone wants to buy Hogwarts Legacy, personally, I don't give a fuck. There are enough shitty human beings in the entertainment and games industry that you can't purchase anything or go and do anything without supporting a shitty human.
Yeah.
So I can't get wrapped up around the axle. Now, if you're retweeting J.K. Rowling, yeah, I'm probably going to get a bit judgy.
Yeah.
But in all of the collective trauma that we've experienced in the last 3 years, if someone gets a moment of joy from playing Hogwarts Legacy, I'm not going to fuck with them about it, because everyone needs their escape. And that's where I'm at. I'm sure that there are others within the trans community that will differ. but based on my own morals, that's where I stand.
Song?
I don't have much to add.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you'll pick up something from what I say, because I want to kind of broaden the scope a little bit, because obviously I agree. I think it's the wrong fight. I think that, like Aquila said, if somebody's signal boosting J.K. Rowling's views, we didn't even get into her absolutely wrong concept of presumption of innocence, or she doesn't believe in it. For if you don't believe in presumption of innocence for a group of people, you don't believe in presumption of innocence for people, because all people deserve presumption of innocence. And to me, that is the one I focus on when I try to talk to people about J.K. Rowling, because that's how bigotry works, right? Bigotry separates you from the recognition that you're saying something extremely stupid. She is so whipped up about trans people, specifically trans women, that she doesn't realize that something must apply to a group if it applies to all groups. What she is saying is stupid on its face. And, where flying monkeys go and defend her for it. And I say the same thing to them. Nope. It's the thing that drives me crazy. And I said, expanding the window to women as a whole, including trans women, is she is leveraging the fact that people let women be illogical and just go bonkers from an emotional level. Women can be logical. Women are logical. And a lot of women are not encouraged to look at things logically because we think it's at odds with femininity. And I think, Song's a shining example of someone who's extremely feminine and very smart and uses her logic to approach problems, right? And that's why I like doing this stuff on her, with her. And it's funny, Aquila, that you said you don't know how to help them, because having fought the flying monkeys a lot now, there was a scene in God of War Ragnarok, yes, inner Kratos, where there's this centaur lady, I forget what they're called there, but she's this, multi-part antagonist that appears at different parts of the map, tries to stomp them, and it's a tough ongoing fight. And Kratos talks about how he respects that she's trying to defend her home in her way, and one of the characters is almost like you respect her, yeah, but he still goes and slaughters her, right? Because she's trying to kill him, he's trying to kill her so she doesn't kill him. That's the way the world works, and that's how I feel. I think that it is very important to reach out to the people who can be helped, which is why I agree. And I don't even consider helping, because I'm, I don't focus on that. But the people who want to understand, the people who are open to changing their mind, I think we shouldn't alienate them right out of the hop over a video game, right? It's just bad messaging. It's stupid. It's illogical. It's what J.K. Rowling's best at. Yeah, because it's playing her game, right? She wants to amygdala hijack the world so that people stop thinking and just want to hide in their respective caves, right? Because that's the world that she can control, People, she had this huge boom to her business where everybody stayed home and was quarantining, right? She does well when people are scared and don't leave the house. I want to encourage everybody, but women, to take those little risks so you can see that the threat is not what you think it is. Take calculated risks so you can expand your horizons. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, when you're talking about, feminine people being logical, I was lucky enough to marry one.
There you go.
And, she's an absolute light in my life. And I'm, I feel lucky to be married to her for so long. And I'm glad that you've got somebody like that in your life, Leanna. you seem to do well with song.
Well, the funny thing is that in doing this, we joke about this all the time. Song helped me understand why I don't get the Thor is hot thing. Because you know that thing of you're not attracted to people who are too much like you. You hit that this could be my brother thing, and it's just that I'm too much like that. I didn't see it until I talked to Song, right? It's like, oh man, one of the funniest things was I saw Thor: Love and Thunder, and I was like, I wanted Song to watch it because I knew she'd hate so much about it, but there were certain things she'd absolutely love. And she was like telegramming me her play-by-play watching it. And I felt bad, but at the same time I was laughing. And it's like, yeah, I'm doing that Thor thing, aren't I? Where I'm sort of amused by someone squirming because I like them. And this is like bonding. I'm like, shit, I'm that asshole. But the goat and the axe and all the stuff she hated, I just love because I'm a fucking butthead.
There's at my local grocery store, there's a display, and it's been there for months now, and I think they've maybe sold 1 out of the 10 DVDs.
Yeah.
But it's for Thor: Love and Thunder, where it says more Thor, new worlds, more goats, or something like that. And I'm like, this is clearly appealing to Liana. It is not appealing to me.
Yeah. And you know, we've had conversations about that. That is what happens when you try to make a movie for absolutely everyone, but especially the Fortnite crowd. And we've talked about this before, but it's been an interesting voyage of discovery. And Aquila, I'm glad you're now a part of it. You know, I didn't know how this was going to go. I wasn't sure if it was going to be what we got or an episode of The View where everybody cross-talked and we couldn't hear each other. I think it worked out very well. So Aquila, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me and bringing me into your small circle. And if there are any other trans-centric issues that crop up, you know where to find me.
See, I want to have trans people on, not to talk about being trans, right? I want you on for other things too.
Well, hit me up.
Yeah, because Aquila thinks about things before she says them, unlike me, which is why she's the PR person. Sog, do you want to close us off with any thoughts here?
My one thing is, referring back to, there is a lot of residual trauma that a lot of people, we've talked about, a lot of people are walking wounded after the last few years. And your trauma and your mental health, your diagnosis, whatever, it is an explanation. It is not a justification. You cannot use it as an excuse to get away with bad behavior. You are still responsible for learning how to be a decent person around your unique trials.
All right, mic drop. This has been 2 Women Talking, 3 Women Talking edition with Song W. Edson. She's tagged in the description box. Aquila, oh my God, is a guest. Is our guest this week. Aquila, thanks so much. We have something else coming up next week, and I forget the topic we talked about. We pre-recorded it before this, and now it's
when the message doesn't hit right.
Thank you. Oh well, okay, that's a good time.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, this worked out well. Thanks for watching, everybody, and keep having conversations.